right.
Thank you all for coming. The music track is going to be tough in the morning. Everyone's going to have heads like badgers' arses, as we say in Scotland, but still you made it, which is great. First thing, this is South by Southwest London, a London festival named after a city in Austin. And when you think about music, you think about Spotify, Swedish, SoundCloud, German, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, of course, in America. But as we introduce Mixcloud, please introduce yourself and your British roots, because this is a rare example of a British music streaming company. Your story, what makes you distinct, and how you survived.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Will. We actually started in the late 2000s, and myself and a couple buddies, our co-founders, we had a university radio show up at Cambridge, and we were looking for somewhere to host the recordings of these radio shows and DJ mixes online. And at that time, there wasn't really any options, at least legal options that were licensed. And I guess somewhat naively, we thought, okay, we can just do this easily and fix it. And it took us a good couple of years to get it up and running and working. But we're proud to say that we started from like a warehouse in Northwest London, and now we're just based just down the road at Second Home in Spitalfields. And I think we're very proud to be a British company from the start, basically.
And licensed as well. You didn't go around the DMCA safe harbor, cat and mouse game. You actually got formally licensed to respect the copyright too.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting kind of segue into what we're talking about today with music curation in the age of AI, and obviously AI being such a hot topic with all of these training models and things like that. But we were very early to actually recognize, if you're playing other people's music, if you're curating it, then it's important that those people who created it benefit and are paid royalties. So we did that very early on. And most recently, we actually made a statement that we are absolutely not going to train any models on what people upload. Our core value is about humans and people discovering music through other humans and people.
People with pulses.
Yes.
Well, we'll come to the algorithm in a second, but I would like to dive into one word that you use at Mixcloud for as long as I've known you, which is community. Community can mean different things to different people. What does it mean to Mixcloud?
For us, it comes back to that human element, that collection of people. I often say how nobody's going to wait in line for an AI DJ in the rain on a Tuesday night in London, right? There is an element of trust in a human who's curating music. There's an element of trust, I guess, within a community of people who trust each other. And oftentimes we see that it kind of forms around subcultures. So, there's actually a big Vietnamese house music subculture on Mixcloud as an example of a culture out there. Dubstep back in the day here from the UK.
Yep.
There's many different subcultures that form, and these are generally, a lot of times, based around different radio stations. And these radio stations are kind of community hubs. So here in London, we've got NTS. In LA, there's Dublab. In New York, there's The Lot Radio. These are all kind of community radio stations that use the platform, are sort of hubs for music communities in their respective cities.
And these are big niches, is what I like to call them. They are niche. They have to be niche, because that's what a community is. But they've become quite big niches. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah, I think so. I think that they are definitely communities that are exploring new types of music, new subcultures, pushing the boundaries. I would say that they're not mainstream, but they are large niches. Yeah.
So let's turn to the algorithm, and there's many ways we can come into this. I want us to think about a pendulum that swings from one side, the human editor, to the other side, which is the algorithm. And what's clear to me is that on streaming services today, the pendulum, in my opinion, has swung too far in favor of the algorithm. If you take the top human editorial playlists on Spotify, previously millions of people would listen to them. Now that audience wouldn't sell out Wembley Stadium. In fact, it wouldn't even sell out the Emirates Stadium. So human editorial has been on the wane in these streaming services, and the algorithm has won. And some people say that's just common sense. Why wouldn't you all want your own personal concierge who prepares that playlist just for you? No shit, Sherlock. But what's your perspective on why that pendulum has swung so far away from humans and towards machines? It feels like Terminator 2, the machines have won.
I think there's a lot of economic reasons. You don't have to employ an editorial staff, things like that. But I think it definitely does miss that element of creating a community, first of all. And I think also a lot of times you'll find these algorithms, the recommendation algorithms, sort of, they get siloed. And there's sort of this lack of serendipity that you kind of lose in the process.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of the reasons behind it. But I'd be curious to hear from you, who obviously has a background in economics, works for some time at Spotify. How is this affecting the economics of music, whether it be kind of mainstream artists, big pop artists, or kind of more indie, smaller artists?
Yeah, I mean, a nice way to convey my emotion on this topic is to look at sheer volume of music coming to streaming services. More music is going onto the shelves of Amazon, Apple, Spotify today than was released in the calendar year of 1989. And we've got the same again coming tomorrow, so just think about that for a moment. We're talking about 130,000 new songs a day.
Wow.
And for me, I think of it as the room's getting increasingly crowded, and it's getting harder and harder to speak to the people at the back. The fragmentation of what we're all listening to. In the past, we'd both listen to the same breakfast radio show, and we'd talk about that song we discovered together. It might not be the greatest song in the world. Maybe the algorithm could have prepared a better song for us, but at least we have something to share. I now struggle to see what there is to share. And when it comes to breaking music, and I wrote this joke for South by Southwest, if you think about the challenge facing the record labels today in an algorithm society, you can't sit on a black leather sofa, do a line of coke, and pitch a song to an algorithm. I said lime, not lime and coke, and pitch a song to an algorithm, because that's just not possible. So for breaking bands, something we'll be discussing this afternoon, it becomes increasingly problematic.
Yeah.
One area of this debate I want to dig into a little deeper here is the casualty of the algorithm. We talked about it briefly there, but if we are, every single person here, listening to our own little echo chamber, and we don't have any Venn diagrams crossing or any shared experiences, what casualties do you think happen from that? What do we miss?
I think over the long term, we end up being a little bit more isolated as listeners and as people, right? You may log into your preferred streaming service of choice, and if it's created you this very bespoke, personalized recommendation list, that's great. But like you were just saying, there's no connection. There's no human connection there. There's no community involved. And I think you're a great example of somebody who is also a DJ. If you haven't checked out his mixes, go check out Will Page and all his great mixes on Mixcloud. But what you do through the time and effort that you put into curating those and putting them up, I see the comments that people leave, and they really enjoy the effort that you've gone to put that together. And I believe that in a very small way, that's bringing you closer to them. That's a connection that is forming. And if we lose those connections, then I think the casualty is just us feeling more isolated as listeners.
And let me just pick up on comments. One of the greatest lessons I've learned in 20 years in the music industry came last year from Marty Diamond, one of the most famous booking agents in the world, representing Ed Sheeran, Coldplay, all your top names. And he said to me that he's getting bombarded with data, with metrics, with stats to promote how big these artists are. I've got 1 billion views, 1 trillion likes, and he puts them on stage and they can't fill out their local pub. So he can't trust the metrics. And he said to me, the only metric he now trusts is the comments per views ratio on YouTube. So Nico Perez has 10 million views on YouTube and 50 comments. I've got 100,000 views on YouTube and 40,000 comments. You work with quality, not quantity. So he's looking for stats or metrics or meaning in these numbers which show that you've broken down resistance factor and you've created a sense of intimacy. Can you just build on that for me in terms of how Mixcloud looks at these metrics, these dashboards that we're bombarded with?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we are right now rethinking. We have a stats feature on the platform. It's very numbers driven. It's very kind of numerical, and we are rethinking that at this moment and thinking about how we can change it to be more about the humans and the people who are listening, and maybe it's more about the insights of your audience so that you can connect to them in new ways. And I think there's a really good example of somebody who's doing this incredibly well, actually an ex-Mixclouder as well, a guy named Derek G, who I think you know as well. He describes himself as a professional music fan, and he is out there not only listening to new music, but recommending it in a way that has a personal touch that I think has enabled him to create these conversations with people and his fans and his audience and create a community around what he does.
And just building on Derek G, who's part music fan, broadcaster, podcaster almost.
Yeah.
If there are people in the audience in the podcast industry, please think about that Marty Diamond rule of comments per views ratio. How is that going to apply to podcasts when Apple and Spotify fully launch comments into their podcast platform too? Another casualty of the algorithm as we all go into our echo chambers for me is the festival industry. So last year, I think we saw something like 70 or 80 festivals cancel. And even the big ones, demand was soft. I didn't see the sold out stickers on them in the month of May or June like they should have. And I was commissioned by Music Business Worldwide to write a piece about this. And I went to Glenn MacDonald, a music alchemist from Spotify, to say, what do you think is causing these festivals to fail to sell out or to close altogether? Why is the festival industry in such crisis? And he pointed to the algorithm. He said that in the past, Nico likes his music, I like my music, but we both agree The Killers' Mr. Brightside is a great tune, our Venn diagrams cross, and we go to a festival, we get trashed off our faces, and we jump around together. That's what drove the festival industry. But now, our Venn diagrams are not crossing. And he gave this beautiful quote, which I wanted to throw at you, which was, he said, now when you stare at a multi-genre festival poster, it looks like a playlist that's been created for somebody else. And I had a lump in the throat when he gave me that. I was like, I want to say that you're wrong, but I think you could be right. Where does that take your brain in terms of what's going on in terms of community experience of music? Festivals are core. It's coming up for them right now. We're into the month of June.
I mean, I think that sort of to what you were saying earlier, there is more music being released every single day now than in the late 80s, right? And so it's an economics thing, supply and demand. There's so much supply out there that it is increasingly important to try and differentiate from all the other acts and artists that are out there. And you can't necessarily do that in an automated marketing way or kind of relying just on the algorithms. I think the people who, and the artists who are differentiating are the ones who are doing the things that don't necessarily scale, to use a very like tech startup Y Combinator phrase. They're doing things where, like Derek G is doing, hosting meetups with people and just having conversations and roundtables and salons and things like that. And so these are things that don't necessarily reach 100,000 people or 1 million people, but they reach a couple hundred, and those people really care about it, and that's how you build a community, and that's ultimately how you build an audience and a fan base, and I think do well.
And just to build on Glenn MacDonald's point, what we're seeing in this year's summer festival market is demand is there. You will see festivals fill the fields, but people are buying one-day tickets, not 3-day tickets, because they see 2 or 3 bands they like and they go to that day, but they don't want to take the risk of exploring bands they don't like. And I think that, at its heart, is an algorithmic effect on us, which is...
It's not just because they're getting old and maybe they have kids and they can't go to all the days.
Or Reading's asking for 300 quid and they can fly to Lisbon for 30. There's that too. Where's the sun going to shine? But I think one festival promoter said to me, if you put 2 K-pop acts on a festival bill on the same day, you sell a bunch of one-day tickets because it's a K-pop festival, but nobody wants to take a risk with days 2 or 3. And I think that is, to Glenn's point, we don't go to festivals and take risks anymore. We go to echo chambers because the algorithm de-risks our lives. Music is about taking risks, no?
Absolutely.
So on that, in the time that we have left, talk to me about how the humans can fight back. When I describe that pendulum swinging far more to the algorithm, what can the humans do to bring it back? What do we do to bring, if you do Jules Holland later, that could be a big show in the 90s or the noughties. I don't think it moves the needle anymore. If you get your band on Graham Norton, that could put you to #1 in 10, 15 years ago. I don't think it even touches the dashboards anymore. What do we do for human editorial to win back ground?
I mean, I think from what I've seen, there's a bit of a growing fatigue with the kind of algorithmically driven recommendations. I think people are getting a bit tired of it. And to fight back, I mean, I think the things that are working are sort of what we've touched on a little bit, which is forming these small communities, very well connected between people. Oftentimes, they're around kind of local radio stations or local music hubs. And I think it's really important to not sort of seek that million subscribers or million fans or that really big kind of numerical number.
This is going to comments per views ratio. Give me quality, not quantity.
Exactly, exactly. And so I think that we've kind of gone through this age where there has been such a focus on kind of like 1 billion views, 1,000 million streams, whatever the number is, and sort of in that process, we sort of lost sight of like, are they actually quality, or are they just happening in the background? And,
Or are they bots?
Or are they bots? Yes.
Yeah, can you just touch on that as well, your views about the question of bots, fraudulent streams, click farms?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's happening. I think that it's kind of, I guess, a byproduct of this focus and kind of optimization of that kind of like large, big number.
Yeah.
It's also a hard problem to solve. You know, it's a bit of a cat and mouse game. We have spam bots on Mixcloud, and you know, we're always trying to crush them, and you let us know when we get spam comments and things like that. But you know, it is, I think, part and parcel with this kind of optimization for a big number.
It's kind of like crime stats. How do you measure this? You know, if crime stats go up, does that mean there's more crime, or we're getting better at catching criminals? But I do eke a little when I look at the Luminate global streaming data platform and I see the top artists in the world. Their number 2 country is Indonesia, or their number 3 country is the Philippines, which is fine. Maybe that's the case, but it just makes me wonder whether this is just giant click farms driving those streaming volumes up, which is not intimacy, right?
True. But I think you've spoken a lot about what you call localization, where at the kind of local level in the past, you know, the major kind of big pop star acts would do very well in Italy, Indonesia, you know, across the world. And now what you've been seeing in kind of your research is that local audiences are listening more and more to local acts. And so I think you've talked about how the local charts are 80, 90+% local acts. Is that right?
In Sweden, 8 of the top 10 artists in Sweden last year were Swedish, and they all chose to perform in Swedish. Some of those artists 10 years ago were performing in English. Now they're going to local language. Denmark, 9 of the top 10 artists in Denmark are Danish, speaking Danish. How many people speak Danish? 5.5 million people in Denmark and some folk in Greenland. That's their audience. So we're seeing it everywhere. You know, people preferring to be a big fish in a small pool as opposed to a minuscule fish in a gigantic pool. Perhaps the best example, if you want to check after we're off stage, is to look up the YouTube artist charts in Brazil. This week, the top 100 artists in Brazil, a top 10 global music market, has 2 international artists. Wow. Lady Gaga at 58 and Bruno Mars at 76. The Weeknd has just dropped out. Every other single slot is now performing in Portuguese. And just on that, the best description I had was from an Amazon executive who described it as what we're experiencing now is a claustrophobia of abundance. By the time you roll out of bed in the morning and grab your phone, you have so much more choice than when I was a child in the Victorian times, so much more choice that you feel this claustrophobia of abundance and you want what's closest to you. And I think that's what I've always said about the internet. The internet can scale just about anything. What it can't scale is intimacy. I want to wrap up in the last 5 minutes. We have to turn to the spat, which I'm going to call it, between yourselves and SoundCloud. SoundCloud, where my mixes are on, changed their terms and conditions. And if I can be blunt, said, we're going to train over all your hard work. And you came out and said something different. Can you just give the audience the background and the stance to that story?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it came to light that SoundCloud was essentially, in their terms and conditions, saying that they would train models on what people have uploaded if it did not belong to a major record label or major rights holder. And we started to receive a lot of...
train off the little guy, but not the big guy.
Yes, that's right.
Sounds like playground politics.
So we started to receive a lot of questions. People were asking us, you know, are you guys doing this as well? We'd like to know, like, where do we stand, et cetera. And so we just decided that we would put the statement out there that we promised not to train on your music. We are not going to train models on it. And I think for us, in some ways, it was very much, you know, much like when we decided to go out and get the licenses to just stream the music. There's this kind of...
Do the right thing.
You do the right thing. Yeah, I think that's like... Is it Spike Lee, the famous film?
Yep.
Radio Raheem. You know, I think it comes down to, like, at the end of the day, if we want there to be a music industry, if we want there to be new acts, new artists, new talent kind of coming up, you have to kind of do the right thing. You have to ensure that, at the very least, if you're going to do training, you ask consent. You ask if they want to participate in it. I recently started a new podcast and spoke with a chap named Matt Dryhurst, who's partners with Holly Herndon, who's also here at South by Southwest. And we talked a lot about this question of training large language models, training these algorithms. And they have developed a very interesting alternative where you can opt into it. They run their training models on public domain data. And I think that they are showing that there are alternative paths to some of these other players who are kind of basically just gobbling up everything, all the content, and training their models on it without permission.
Yeah, and I think it's not the copyright question which is going through Parliament just now. For me as the DJ, it's a consent question. The 2023 mix, Believe in Humanity, which, thanks to the incredible work of Ralph Simon, we actually got a speech from Carole King to introduce the mix. My gut reaction was, you can't train off Carole King's voice. Me, I'm nothing, but that's Carole King's voice. Yeah. So I was really pleased that Mixcloud actually took the stance of seeking consent as opposed to... But on that, can you just bring us up to date what the positions are now? Where is SoundCloud? They've U-turned that decision, is that correct?
I think so. I think I can't really comment for them and say what they're doing, but I think they...
Which is important because that shows there is a sense of public pressure here of, to do the right thing.
I think that there is a general consensus that we shouldn't just kind of, loot and plunder the creative endeavors of hundreds of thousands, not millions of artists, and then not give them anything for that. It seems...
You're here to that. So in the last couple of minutes, you have survived. How many years has Mixcloud been?
Coming up to 17 years now.
17 years.
Yeah.
Where do you want Mixcloud to be? A British music streaming service, a licensed, orthodox licensed British music streaming service, a rare, very rare example. Where do you want to be for your 20th anniversary?
I think, for us, it's coming back to this idea of community and people being at the core of everything. And so if you want to go and find, XYZ album or single track, Spotify's great, YouTube's great, there's all places you can do that. But you're not necessarily going to build those relationships with other people. You're not gonna have that social interaction. And so I think that's an area where Mixcloud can hopefully build something that helps these communities kind of form, grow, communicate, and ultimately thrive. So we've done that a lot with radio stations and small independent radio stations. But I think the next step for us is, what does that look like if there isn't necessarily a central physical hub, but there are communities that form around different subcultures?
Last question to what I said earlier. You're on the internet. The internet can't scale intimacy. Do you think Mixcloud can?
I don't think we can ever do as good a job as in real life, things like this, where people get together and they talk and, they spend time together in real life. But I think we can sort of try and be a close second. I think that would be a good ambition to aim for.
Fantastic. Well, as somebody who came through Straight No Chaser magazine, I think you're carrying the torch for intimacy in music, so I'm a huge fan of the work you're doing. Can we please give a round of applause to Nico Perez, doing the right thing. Thank you, guys.
And for Will Page, thank you very much.